The Vietnam War was a conflict during the Cold War where the communist North Vietnamese and South Vietnamese partisans fought against the at least formally democratic South Vietnamese government, who were supported by the United States with the intention of preventing the spread of communism. It was a long and costly conflict that resulted in more than 2 million deaths in total. But first, to truly understand the Vietnam War, we must go back to the very beginning. From the years 1858 to 1945, Vietnam was a part of French Indochina located in the southeast of Asia. French Indochina was composed of former French colonies of current Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. During World War II, in the summer of 1940, Nazi Germany partially occupied France. Vichy France, officially known as the French state, who collaborated with Nazi Germany, was formed around this time. With France weakened, the Japanese military invaded Vietnam in September 1940. As a result, colonial administration of French Indochina was passed to Vichy France. They were friendly with countries who were fighting alongside the Japanese. Vichy France had a policy of collaboration with Nazi Germany, in which the Japanese were granted airfields, ports, and railroads in Vietnam. The Japanese suspected that the French colonists might be assisting the Allies, so in March 1945, they removed them from power. Many French officers were imprisoned in the process. They then invited Emperor Bao Xai to declare Vietnamese independence and gave him power, though it was only formal. Bao Xai would be the last emperor of Vietnam. The Japanese occupation was thought of differently by the people. Many believed they were no better than the French, but some welcomed them, stating that Asian colonial powers were preferable to Westerners. During the Japanese occupation, a communist militant group formed in 1941 called the Viet Minh grew in power. They were called that way after their leader Ho Chi Minh, who will be covered later. Around 1945, they focused on propaganda and recruiting. The organization gained over 100,000 new members and the movement spread to central Vietnam. The Viet Minh started seizing control of Japanese-held villages and towns. They were making great strides towards gaining control over Vietnam, and the Japanese were on the verge of defeat. When the US dropped atomic weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Japanese were forced to surrender. Therefore, Japanese forces left Vietnam and the power was left in the hands of Emperor Bao Xai. In South Vietnam, French prisoners were released by the British from Japanese internment camps. Under the leadership of Ho Chi Minh, the people were able to launch a successful uprising in which they managed to seize power from Emperor Bao Xai. Ho Chi Minh was inspired by the success of Vladimir Lenin's Bolshevik Revolution. This inspiration led to him joining the new French Communist Party, and he started recruiting members of a Vietnamese nationalist movement. During this time, he spent a lot of time traveling the world and being a representative of the Communist International Organization. After France was defeated by Germany in 1940, Ho Chi Minh tried to seize the opportunity for the Vietnamese nationalist cause. He returned to Vietnam with his lieutenants in January of 1941 and organized the militant nationalist Viet Minh. They intended to take control of Vietnam. When the Allies won World War II in 1945, Japanese forces left Vietnam and Emperor Bao Xai was left in control of the now independent Vietnam. After this, Ho Chi Minh was able to seize control of Hanoi and become the president of North Vietnam. On the 2nd of September 1945, independence was declared with the creation of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. The French, however, did not agree with the idea of a communist regime, and after failed negotiations, the First Indochina War began. The war lasted 8 years, beginning in 1946 and ending in 1954 with the Viet Minh as victors. After the French lost the war in the decisive Battle of Dien Bien Phu, they signed an independence agreement which temporarily divided Vietnam by a demilitarized zone along the 17th parallel. It was also agreed upon that in 1956, the North and the South were to be reunified following internationally supervised elections. In 1955, Ngo Dinh Diem became the president of South Vietnam and he refused to permit the elections. He wanted to consolidate his power in the south, and with this, Vietnam would remain divided. North Vietnam was led by Ho Chi Minh and South Vietnam by Bao Dai, who would later be replaced by Ngo Dinh Diem. The people, however, were not happy with the separation, as they wanted for Vietnam to be a unified country. Ngo Dinh Diem was a political figure in Vietnam. When the Communists declared independence with the creation of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, Diem was offered to join their office. However, Ngo Dinh Diem was an anti-communist and decided to go into self-declared exile, in which he went to the United States. During his time there, he acquired the respect of many political figures, including John F. Kennedy and the future president at the time, Dwight D. Eisenhower. The connections he gained would help him secure leadership in South Vietnam by getting military and political assistance from the US. In 1955, he established a referendum vote to determine the new leader of the Republic of South Vietnam. The vote was between Diem and previous leader Bao Dai. On the 23rd of October 1955, Ngo Dinh Diem was elected as the new leader. Diem promised to make South Vietnam a democratic republic, but it soon became apparent that those were not his intentions. In fact, many of his policies were nepotistic, as he appointed his own family members as top government officials. During his leadership, the Republic of Vietnam was divided into militarized religious sects and cartels. The South Vietnamese government was also under attack by the Viet Cong, who with the support of the North Vietnamese military fought against South Vietnam. In 1960, they would become the military arm of the National Liberation Front. The NLF, formerly the National Front for the Liberation of South Vietnam, was a political organization with the objective to overthrow the South Vietnamese government and unify Vietnam under communist rule. The organization was represented in all the communist countries at the time, and also in several neutral ones. Diem intended to create stability inside the country with the help of government forces, but his actions, alongside his public exposure to corruption and brutality, caused Diem to lose support of many of the people. The United States, who had supported Diem this entire time, were becoming more and more dissatisfied with his government, stating that it was too deeply flawed to survive. The main reasons for this sentiment was the Viet Cong, who kept growing in strength, and Diem's response to a massive uprising by the country's Buddhist majority population, which further convinced the US that Diem would not be able to rally his people against the opposing communists. In 1963, the ARVN generals led a coup against Diem, assassinating him. The US knew that the generals were planning a coup, but they did not interfere. After the assassination, the generals who staged the coup took over leadership in South Vietnam. One of the generals, named Duong Quan Minh, became the new president. His time wouldn't last long, as only a few months later he surrendered to Nguyen Khanh. Khanh was one of the generals who planned the coup, but the others considered him untrustworthy. He would later overthrow Duong Quan Minh in a bloodless coup in 1964. He was president for only about a year before he was exiled to the United States. Nguyen Cao Ky, another general, would become the next president. In 1967, Nguyen Van Thieu became the last president till the fall of Saigon in 1975. During the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, there was a policy articulated by US President Dwight D. Eisenhower, which suggested that a communist government in one nation would quickly cause communist takeovers in nearby countries, each falling like a line of dominoes. This so-called domino theory was used by the United States to justify its interference in the Vietnam War and its support for the non-communist dictator Ngo Dinh Diem in South Vietnam. To summarize, the United States was afraid that communism would spread to South Vietnam and then to the rest of Asia. I quote, "You have a row of dominoes set up. You knock over the first one, and what will happen to the last one is the certainty that it will go over very quickly," Eisenhower said. So you could have a beginning of a disintegration that would have the most profound influences. The Gulf of Tonkin incident. The United States supported South Vietnam and its military with equipment, financial aid, and advisors. By 1964, the number of advisors had increased to 17,000. All this assistance, however, proved insufficient to stop the advance of the Viet Cong. On the 2nd of August 1964, an US Navy destroyer, the USS Maddox, was patrolling in the Gulf of Tonkin when it was attacked by two North Vietnamese boats. There was another attack on the USS Maddox reported on the 4th of August, but because of the poor weather conditions, it's doubtful that the attack even occurred. However, the incident was taken as fact and was used as the main excuse to escalate the war. After the US Congress reviewed the incident, they gave President Lyndon B. Johnson permission to wage war on North Vietnam. The US Congress was never given evidence about the second attack on the Navy destroyer even occurring. Until 1945, Vietnam was a part of French Indochina. French Indochina was composed of the territories of the current countries Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. Japanese invasion of Vietnam in 1940 and occupation in 1945. During World War II in 1940, the Japanese military invaded Vietnam. In 1945, they managed to remove French forces from power, after which began the Japanese occupation. Ho Chi Minh as the president of North Vietnam. After the Japanese left Vietnam at the end of World War II, Communist Ho Chi Minh seized the opportunity and took control of Hanoi. He then became the president of the Democratic Republic of North Vietnam. The First Indochina War started in 1946 and ended in 1954. The war was fought between the French and the Viet Minh. After this war, Vietnam was divided into South and North Vietnam. Ngo Dinh Diem as the leader of South Vietnam. In 1955, Ngo Dinh Diem became the president of South Vietnam. He was assassinated in 1964 by ARVN generals. Spread of communism. During the Cold War, there was a policy called the domino theory, which suggested that one country falling to communism would lead to the spread of communism to surrounding states. The Gulf of Tonkin incident was an attack on a US Navy destroyer on the 2nd of August 1964. This attack would become the main excuse for the US to wage war on North Vietnam. This video talked about the events leading to the Vietnam War. The second video will cover the war itself. Thank you for watching.